So welcome to the next session of Mention Computer 2020. This session is about security, privacy, and trust. And our first talk is on security onboarding by Alex Haddock. I just want to announce briefly that I will, previous to each paper, announce whether you can direct your questions towards the speaker in English or German or both. So for Alex, please direct your questions to him only in English. Thank you very much. Let's start with the video.
Security Onboarding, an interview study on security training for temporary employees. Researched by Alex Haddock, Jake Weidman, and Jens Grossklogs, representing both the Pennsylvania State University and the Technical University of Munich. First, some background. Main goals of this study. First, to determine how companies handle onboarding of short-term employees, specifically interns. Second, to determine how aware companies are regarding the security risk of interns. Third, to determine how aware interns are of potential security risk, including awareness of Wi-Fi vulnerabilities, discussion of general security practices, knowledge of security tools, as well as perceived risk of threat. Methodology. We recruited 15 participants from Penn State University who had completed an internship the previous summer. The participants took a pre-survey questionnaire for us to easily capture demographics. Following the survey, a semi-structured interview was performed to dive deep into the participants' individual experiences. Results of the study. Onboarding experience. We found that each participant's onboarding was different, varying from content covered and total length of time. Notably, larger organizations had stricter, more formalized onboarding. We found there were multiple methods used, including formal documents, in-person meetings, and online instructional videos. Devices. Most participants, 80%, were issued a company-owned device. These devices contained internet firewalls, blocking sites such as Facebook, ESPN, and others. Interestingly, most organizations did not manage mobile device use. However, one participant was required to download Mobile Iron, a software security suite, to use their mobile device. Security protocols and their enforcement. We found that most organizations have password requirements, varying in complexity with set timeframes to be changed. Some interns sent work-related information through personal emails, revealing a security hole. Also, some organizations had key card or fingerprint scanning for entry into the building. Finally, one participant experienced consequences if they left their workstation without locking the computer. This was monitored by IT to ensure security protocols were followed. Now let's dive into further discussion. The importance of clear, concise, and consistent onboarding. Proper onboarding leads to the success of employees and interns alike, especially when onboarding is focused on workplace cohesion and instilling organizational values. An interesting proposal includes the use of MOOCs. A 2015 study found 71% of educators find it effective. Applying this to onboarding reduces organizational effort, both in employees' time and the ability to reuse the course for all future employees. The downsides of these courses, such as motivational concerns, retention, interaction, plagiarism, and cheating, are less applicable to employee onboarding. Interns and bring your own device. Installing security software on personal devices enhances an organization's security if interns choose to use their own devices on a company's network. A second option would be to simply eliminate the use of personal devices on the network. We found that half of the participants did not connect to their company network due to privacy concerns, so restricting connection may be the simplest solution. Interns and their access. Many organizations limit the access of interns compared to full-time employees. Organization-issued phones and laptops were given to full-time employees and not always to interns. Remote email access differed as well. Further, there was restricted data access for interns. This restriction risks making work less efficient, but participants did not find these data restrictions odd and complied. Final thoughts. Sophistication of onboarding varies greatly over organizations, including a combination of in-person meetings, document review, online training, or none at all. Organizations must decide on proper security protocols for personal devices or completely restrict them. Also, enhanced policies must be put in place surrounding sending data between work and personal devices. Overall, further research in this space is strongly recommended.
So with this, we can also begin the question and answer session. So Alex, let me perhaps start with a question by myself. So from your observations, what do you think are the main takeaways when it comes to comparing security onboarding for regular employees versus this newly studied group of temporary employees that you had to look at?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we found is that the temporary employees didn't always get the same amount of onboarding. I think that the reason why was because they're only there for 3 months, and sometimes the onboarding process for full-time employees is a 3-month time span. So when these companies bring in these interns, they don't do everything that they would do with a full-time employee because they know that the interns are only going to be there for a brief period of time.
That's right. So maybe an announcement for everybody. So you can use a chat window on the YouTube stream to also pose additional questions to any of the speakers. So we are missing any further question at this moment. So let me dig a little bit deeper into the matters that you have studied. So in terms of countermeasures, you also mentioned MOOCs. So for smaller and medium-sized businesses, how do you expect this to work when these organizations don't have a lot of capital and capabilities towards producing such content?
Yeah, so I think that you know, one of the things that they could do instead is even just recording the that process itself. Having that recording, they can go ahead and have the interns, or any employees really, sit down, watch that, and maybe get tested on it afterwards. And that way, whoever would be in charge of that, whether it be somebody in IT or combination with HR, they have that. They do it once, and then every time there's new employees coming on, their own time isn't taken up to have to do all those in-person meetings. And I think that if you can't get a great online course put together, it's another way to save time.
Mm-hmm. So we have a question from the YouTube feeds. Hi, Alex. Thanks for the presentation. I was curious if there were any patterns in participants' function, like business versus engineering, etc., with what kind of security onboarding they received.
Yeah, so actually found that a lot in the business function tended to have more onboarding and stricter onboarding. That could be that they were at a larger company, but we did see that seemed to occur a lot more.
So I suspect one would have to increase the scale of the study to a certain degree to have such patterns emerging, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's hard to say with 15 participants that identify a pattern across industries.
All right, so I believe we are slowly, actually we still have a minute for an additional question. So perhaps my co-chair also wants to pose a question.
Actually, I would like to understand, you said that MOOCs have been identified as a proper, maybe, tool to onboard these interns. But what about, small and medium-sized companies? Do you think that this is paying off at some time for them?
So could you rephrase that? The end part, you're saying that could it still pay off?
From my understanding, the production of MOOCs is very expensive.
Mm-hmm.
And then if I consider that small and medium-sized companies do not have much interns over time, mm-hmm. or in time, I don't see, or I don't understand. I would like to know your view on this, whether this at the end will pay off for smaller and medium-sized companies, the production of these MOOCs.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So I think the approach instead would be that they would record whatever training would need to be done. whether that be combination between HR and IT working on it together. And then they can give that presentation to the interns and then maybe be quizzed on it or have a discussion afterwards. So they may not be able to do MOOCs, but they can still do a variation of it where they're saving their time so that they don't have to be going through the same type of presentations every single time a new employee is onboarded.
All right, so I believe we are out of time for this presentation. So thank you, Alex, for your insights regarding security onboarding. And let's move on to the second talk by Timo Baumann.
Prosodic addressee detection, ensuring privacy in always-on spoken dialogue systems. What was the motivation for this kind of study? Alexa, Siri, and Co. are already used by 26% of German internet population, and it's still rising. But there are also many reported incidents of false activations. We ask ourselves, can prosodic information help to avoid false activations, and how to measure it if human-human and human-computer interaction usually differ. Therefore, we rely on the restaurant booking corpus having complexity identical interactions. This study is designed explicitly to eliminate factors influencing dialogue complexity. For example, the effect of a visible counterpart and the influence of the dialogue domain. Therefore, the task for the participant was to reserve tables in a restaurant with specific constraints over telephone and either with a human agent or with a technical system. And the responses from both were pre-scripted so that we can say the complexity of having human-human interaction and of having human-computer interaction is identical. Our experimental design was first a human annotation where we have 10 German-speaking students and 10 non-German speaking students who should decide on different samples if the participant is talking to a human being or to a technical system. The same task was then solved using an automatic recognition system. Here we made use of a neural sequence model. What are the results? Here we are reporting leave one subject out results, and we use the F1 score as performance measure. The human annotation, German speaking, were a bit better because they could include language-specific linguistic knowledge, whether the non-German speaking students could not use that knowledge. Regarding the automatic classification results, it can be seen that the automatic classifier outperforms the human annotation in many cases, despite the fact that this classifier does not include linguistic knowledge. This brings us to our conclusion. The complexity identical addressee detection is quite challenging. We achieve only moderate human annotation performance, but our neural sequence model has a comparable performance. Prosodic features allow privacy-preserving addressee detection. They concentrate on how it is said rather than what is said to activate the assistant's interaction. Thank you for your attention.
So thank you, Timo, for your talk. I'm curious, how important do you see the ability to detect essentially the addressee versus to detect, for example, in the flow of conversation, important contextual sensitive features?
Oh, it's really important because there are a lot of incidents reported where these speech assistants were not able to distinguish that. For example, there was the dollhouse incident in the US where the Alexa falsely ordered dollhouses just because the anchorman of a TV show reported about a little girl that ordered one dollhouse for herself. Or that if you have a smart home environment, then if you have a conversation with within the family, it also happens that this conversation was falsely recorded and sent to a colleague of the father, so that the really private information was sent out. So the technical devices should be able to distinguish when they are addressed and when they are not addressed. And mostly just by the speech content, it's not available for that.
Luigi, do you also have a question?
At the moment, I don't have one, to be frank.
So let me dig a little bit deeper here, right? So you mentioned as one risk factor that essentially the entity trying to understand the conversation is, for example, doing a wrongful order, etc., right? But I would not necessarily argue that this is a very strong privacy problem. So how do you distinguish, for example, between such cases where you, for example, execute an action that was not intended by actually the speaker or somebody else in the household and true privacy risks?
Yeah, the problem is with these always-on spoken dialogue systems, you are not aware that they are always on. So for you, it could also happen that you forget about them. And therefore, these systems should be aware of the fact that they are really addressed or not. So they should have a kind of re-question if they were really meant to be used. In every case, they are unsure about the actual trigger word. What happens at the moment is they are activated every time where you say a trigger word that is nearly similar, prosodically similar to the real activation word. Then the conversation is sent to the producer of that device, and there's a checked again. So it could happen that the background speech or that totally not meant speech is sent to the producer of that system. So that is, I think, always a privacy issue, because it could be that, for example, you say, "Hey, Alex, what's up?" and then you start having a private conversation, and this part of the private conversation is then sent to the producer of Alexa. So it's always a critical privacy issue, and this should be solved on the device.
Okay, thank you very much for these interesting answers. Really fascinating work. So unfortunately, we have to move on to the next speaker. So thanks a lot. Our next speaker is Sebastian Wilhelm.
Hello, my name is Sebastian Wilhelm. I am a PhD student at the Deckendorf Institute of Technology in cooperation with the University of Passau. With this video, I would like to present you our findings on how to detect human presence indoors based on the concentration of carbon dioxide in the ambient air. In our current research, we mainly focus on the activity detection of persons within the residence. For this purpose, common systems usually use sensors such as motion detectors or cameras. We, on the other hand, try to reuse existing data from the home infrastructure, disaggregate it, and draw conclusions about the activities of the residents. In this work, we have examined smart weather stations that monitor indoor air quality for their sustainability for person recognition. The natural outdoor concentration of carbon dioxide is between 350 and 400 parts per million. Indoors, concentrations between 350 and 2,500 parts per million are commonly encountered. Thereby, with its respiration, humans are the most important source of carbon dioxide. The reduction of the carbon dioxide concentration in closed rooms is mainly affected by air exchange and infiltration of outside air. It can therefore be assumed that the carbon dioxide concentration in rooms increases when humans are in the room and decreases again when people left the room. To support this thesis, we recorded the carbon dioxide concentration and additional label data in the bedrooms of 2 households over a period of 7 days. For measuring the carbon dioxide concentration, we used a commercially available weather station. In addition, the residents documented when windows or doors were opened or closed and when people were present in the room. Our records are shown on the slide. We applied motive clustering algorithms to the recorded time series of carbon dioxide concentration in the rooms to identify common patterns. In red and green, we now see the patterns found. These correspond to the events people entered the room and people leave the room. Thus, we were able to prove our theoretical assumption that it is possible to infer the presence or absence of people from the carbon dioxide concentration indoors. In future work, the presented methodology should be extended in a large-scale study with several test households, additional rooms and high-resolution sensors. Thanks for watching my video. For further questions, feel free to write me a mail.
So thank you, Sebastian. Feel free to ask questions to Sebastian in German or English. My first question would be, you mentioned these mobile weather stations. How popular are those in smart form or non-smart form?
These weather stations are quite popular, and we used, like say, the manufacturer devices from the manufacturer Netatmo. These are really broad in private households.
Mm-hmm. So we have a question from another speaker. Measuring a buildup of CO2 concentration feels like it has greater measurement lag. Does this lag have benefits for any possible applications of this technique?
Yeah, these weather stations have a lag of about 10 minutes. We can fetch data all 10 minutes only. But there are some applications where it could be good as well, because if you want to prove if a room is really empty, for example, in basements or in something like churches, it would be really interesting to use sensors, CO2 sensors, because you need only one sensor to prove a whole big room and not need some motion detectors which have angel you can detect with, which is very limited only. And the carbon dioxide is in the whole room nearly the same.
So this is a session on security, privacy, and trust. So can you say anything regarding your studied scenario that would indicate that using these sensors is advantageous from the privacy security perspective or disadvantageous?
Yeah, we are really interested in privacy, and these sensors or these algorithms we use for detecting the activity would be able to be trained on a server and then be used on a Raspberry Pi or so on in the household, so that the data have never left the residence or the household. So we have no privacy issue. But if the sensors, as they are now from Netatmo, they have an open API, and then it is, of course, a privacy issue if you can detect the presence or absence of people indoors.
Mm-hmm. Luigi?
Thanks. I think I have a related question. What are you capable of deriving from the CO2 sensor data? Are you capable of deriving how many people are within the room? Can you distinguish between children and adults? Can you distinguish between female and male persons? What are you capable of deriving?
This would be future work. Currently, we have so basic sensors, so cheap sensors, which cannot, where we only can identify that there are people in the room or people are not in the room, but not if there are maybe pets or many people in the room. Only the presence of people in general are to detect with this system.
Mm-hmm. So thank you, Sebastian. Unfortunately, we have to move on to the next paper. Very interesting speech. Thank you.
Thanks.
So the next speaker is Florian Lehmann. It's an invited paper.
Hello and welcome. My name is Florian Lehmann and I'm going to present you the work Heartbeats in the Wild, a field study exploring ECG biometrics in everyday life. I have worked on this topic together with my colleague Daniel Buschek. We are both from the University of Bayreuth. With our work, we have explored whether it's possible to distinguish people based on heartbeats. The technology to do so has already arrived in the consumer market. For instance, as you can see in the picture, the Apple Watch Series 4 can measure the electrocardiogram, or short ECG. It's mainly used for health applications. But pioneering work showed that the ECG can be used as a biometric as well. However, most research relied on data from lab studies or from public medical databases. This is why Singh and Singh called for field studies. And there was already a field study, but only with 5 participants. With our study, we wanted to fill this gap and ran a field study with 20 participants. Overall, we collected the data for 1 week. To obtain the signals from the participants, we used a MovieSense ECG Move chest belt tracking device. On the collected data, we applied a pre-processing pipeline. The pipeline contained basic methods, for instance, downsampling, filtering, and AR peak detection. You can find more details on that in the paper. This is the model we used for the evaluation. For each P and Q in the data, which are user and attacker, we trained a classifier. To train the classifier, we fed data from the user and rest of the world to it. And user was labeled as 1 and the rest of the world as 0s. Attacker data was spared out from the training. In the testing phase, we fed data from the user and attacker to the classifier. They should be recognized as a 1 or 0. We evaluated the data in 2 scenarios. Scenario 1 was a random subsampling approach in which we ignored the order of cardiac cycles and days. In scenario 2, we kept the order of days and cardiac cycles. Additionally, we varied the amount of enrollment and validation days. For evaluation, we applied a machine learning model and used 3 classifiers to test it. To compare the results, we have computed the receiver operating characteristics curve with the area under the curve, as well as the equal error rate. Decisions were made on 3 subsequent heartbeats. Here you can see a comparison of the random forest classifier between scenario 1 and 2a. The equal error rate in scenario 1 is 5.23% lower than in scenario 2a. We contribute this mainly to the fact that the ECG might differ to some degree from day to day and from situation to situation. Taking training data from only 1 day might not reflect this sufficiently. And now, let's have a look on how it improves with taking into account more decisions. Taking into account 15 heartbeats for validation, we were able to improve the classification. The equal error rate dropped by 7.53%. We can say, making the validation longer can improve the classification overall. The results of the questionnaires showed that the chest belt tracker was perceived mainly as neutral. But even more interesting, over the half disagreed to accept to wear a tracker for ECG biometrics. We found the more variability there is in the training data, the better classification works. Taking up to 15 heartbeats can improve classification, but it's still less robust than in lab studies. Responses by the participants on the questionnaire showed an aversion to use ECG trackers for biometrics. We conclude that it's possible to distinguish people by their heartbeats in everyday life. We see the need for future studies to go beyond lab studies and to evaluate such systems in the intended application contexts. ECG data is sensitive data that holds information about your identity and your health state. That is why we think that privacy is an important part when designing ECG biometric systems and should always be done responsibly. Thank you for watching.
So thank you for this talk, Florian. My first question would be, could you go in a little bit more detail how you're trying to preserve and guarantee privacy on the end user device?
So the computation was done on a server. So I think you can, okay, well, in this case, you would have to compute it on the device itself. We have used chessboard tracking devices, which means we only collected the data with the devices, but computed on computers, which was basically a server. So yes, you would have to use mobile devices and compute it there, and just run the classification itself on the server.
Mm-hmm. So we have a question from YouTube. Thanks for the interesting presentation. The question is, how likely are the findings to transfer to wrist-worn HR detection, perhaps with less accurate, detailed HR features available?
So I think measuring the signals with a wristband device would cause more noise. Every time you move your arm, that would cause noise, I think so. But if you have like, I think that's the case with the Apple Watch, you have to record the ECG in a very, very restricted pose. So just keep your arm without movements in a steady position, and it would work quite good, I think.
Very interesting. Do you have any plans, just to follow up on this question, to compare your system to other approaches in the research literature in particular?
Not yet.
But what would be a good candidate?
Maybe can you refine that a little bit? Or?
So, I mean, I think there are opportunities to contrast and compare your work to other ECG approaches, but perhaps also other biometric systems that try to utilize data that is perhaps non-standard, so a non-fingerprint, iris scan, and so on and so forth.
I think it's quite hard to compare the systems because you use different signals. And I think it's more interesting to compare different factors. And maybe that's the way to go to enhance security.
That's right. So what aspects of security are you mostly looking at in the broad domain of identification and authentication? Where do you see a particularly suitable application scenario?
Well, I think that are very special cases, like in computing centers, laboratories, hospitals, with not too large groups of users, because then you might get problems in identifying a single person.
Luigi, do you have a question?
Yeah, I have a general one. From a security perspective, if biometric data of a person gets public, you cannot authenticate anymore this person. And we know that getting, let's say, fingerprint information is not so difficult, maybe, as someone would expect. So what about the heartbeat data?
Heartbeat data varies from time to time, and that is what we found. For example, it has some variation between days. So maybe it would be secure to use the data after some time. So, assume there is a data breach, then you could not use it directly after that, but maybe after 1 year. That could be possible.
Okay, interesting.
But yes, as soon as the data is breached, it's quite problematic to use it for biometrics.
All right, Florian, I want to thank you for your talk. let's move on to the next talk by Colin Watson. And please direct your question to Colin in English. Thank you.
Unconsented data transfusions, attitudes towards extracting personal device data for public health emergencies.
Our paper reports on a small-scale proof-of-concept qualitative pilot and pre-study investigating what UK citizens' opinions may be towards extraction of medical data from their personal devices, with or without their consent, in the event of a public health incident.
User attitudes were collected through a focus group discussion approach. Convenient subjects were self-selecting, digitally literate trainee researchers from non-vulnerable groups, aged between 20 and 39 years old, living in England. The assisted discussion was framed to elicit a range of views moving from a general medical data consent topic to more specific national emergency issues. These were from a heart condition to tuberculosis and finally an influenza pandemic.
Next, I will show some video recordings of the inductive thematic analysis, which were performed using visually and textually supported creative mind mapping using 4 approaches.
Number 1, the long list of excuses. Number 2, medicine. Number 3, consent. Number 4, knockout whist or card sorting.
These recordings will continue in the background while I now summarise the findings.
Participants constructed their view of smartphone data as an inherent part of themselves, such that the phone is a vital organ leading to the overarching theme of "my phone is part of my body," and the consequent metaphor used in the paper's title that taking data from a personal phone is the equivalent of transferring a vital matter like blood in a transfusion. This work indicates that smartphones can be perceived as tools forming extensions to human bodies, not merely in a metaphorical sense, but quite directly with innate emotional relevance to the people using the technology. The findings highlight a high degree of reluctance by the participants to any form of unconsented access, in the absence of overwhelming evidence of greater society-wide benefits. Our study was executed before the impact of the coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic, and the resulting grave international impact became apparent. In the light of the ongoing pandemic, lockdowns, and deployments of digital technologies for data collection for public health purposes, we are currently augmenting this work with follow-up studies to investigate the impact on attitudes and to also investigate the quantitative differences between the presented scenarios. Apart from this video, we also created a static poster, which looks like this. And here are our email addresses if you'd like to get in touch subsequently. Thank you.
So I have a question regarding the stated perceptions of sensitivity by the participants. So on the one hand, we are observing that fitness-related apps, but also health-related apps are tremendously successful in the marketplace. But then in your presentation, you also echoed a result that we are seeing very often in research studies, which is one of heightened concern. So how do you connect these two distinct findings?
In our study, we picked up on very much that people were treating their devices as almost part of their body, so they felt it was part of themselves. So I think this collecting of fitness data, medical data for their own use was perceived as just being part of how they lived. But they didn't necessarily, they felt that was very private and didn't actually want that to become something that was public or shared, or at least not unless it was very much under their control.
So what role do you feel plays the emerging privacy regulation in Europe, but also in the United States when it comes to the utilization of health data on people's personal devices? Does it even cover the type of data that you're interested in?
It's an interesting area because there is this consideration that some data might be of use to society, and that might overrule any personal preferences. And I think aspects like that are do form part of such legislation. but our impression is that people are much less aware of that as a thing and consider that their consent is the thing that matters completely and that can't be overruled. There was also some concern about suddenly realizing, well, if the state can access data, how is it doing that? What has it managed to do? Has it compromised my device already? What else has it done? What else has it got?
Mm-hmm. Luigi, do you have a question?
Yeah, I have a question regarding your results. Your results suggest that we do have yet another privacy paradox here. When you ask people what they would like to do or what they would do with their personal data, they usually tend to answer, yeah, I would hide them or keep it private. But actually, when you observe what they are really doing with it, they are going and sharing it with, I don't know whom. Is this a privacy paradox you somehow discovered here as well, or how do you judge your results in the light of results of further studies?
Yes, this was really quite a formative study, and we are looking at undertaking follow-up studies to investigate the impact on attitudes, but also to try to look a little bit in more detail between the various scenarios, because we had the scenario of sort of heart condition, tuberculosis, and then influenza pandemic. And we want to look at how people's attitudes and concerns are varying across those different types of situations, and to see whether that has any contribution to this thought about these paradoxes that exist. Yes.
So thank you very much, Colin. We are unfortunately out of time. Very interesting topic scenario that you're studying. Der nächste Vortrag ist auf Deutsch von Laura Sophie Hesse.
Herzlich willkommen zum Vortrag des Forschungsprojekts Der Einfluss von Persönlichkeit, Technikaffinität und Risikobewusstsein auf Technologieakzeptanz. In den nächsten 5 Minuten werde ich Sie kurz durch unsere Studie führen, die wir am Beispiel der Sprachsteuerung von Fernsehgeräten durchgeführt haben. Die Menschen sind sehr offen für neue Dinge, solange sie nur den Alten gleichen. Dieses Zitat stammt von Charles F. Kettering, einem US-amerikanischen Ingenieur, und er bringt eigentlich ganz gut auf den Punkt, dass neue Technologien oftmals Akzeptanzprobleme gegenüberstehen. Und ja, schaut man sich mal so die Technologien heutzutage an, scheint es so, als würde die technische Realisierbarkeit dem Fortschritt keine Grenzen setzen, sondern eher der Mensch, der oftmals skeptisch ist, den limitierenden Faktor darstellen. So, jetzt stellt sich die Frage, welche Faktoren die Akzeptanzbildung dann beeinflussen, und es lässt sich grundsätzlich feststellen, dass das Spannungsfeld zwischen Technologie und Akzeptanz im wissenschaftlichen Kontext durchaus ein essentielles Forschungsfeld darstellt, dass es auch einige Modelle gibt, dass jedoch die nutzerspezifischen Einflussfaktoren nicht genug beachtet wurden. Und genau da möchte jetzt unsere Studie ansetzen, und deswegen untersucht sie anhand der Sprachsteuerung von Fernsehgeräten, ob nutzerspezifische Faktoren wie Persönlichkeit, Technikaffinität und Risikobewusstsein einen Einfluss auf die Nutzungsintention. Hierfür haben wir dann ein Modell entwickelt, das ich kurz vorstellen möchte. Und zwar sind die ersten beiden unabhängigen Faktoren, die in das Modell eingehen, der erwartete Nutzen. Heißt, wie verbessere ich sich meine Ausgangssituation durch die Nutzung der Technologie, und der erwartete Aufwand. Diese beiden Konstrukte stammen aus Modellen, die sich bereits in der Forschung etabliert haben. Die abhängige Variable ist in dem Fall dann die Nutzungsabsicht. Als nächstes werden die 3 Hauptkonstrukte der Studie, also Persönlichkeit, Technikaffinität und Risikobewusstsein, mit in das Modell aufgenommen. Persönlichkeit wird hier anhand der Big Five gemessen. Und diese 3 Konstrukte haben sich einerseits aus Meinungsumfragen ergeben und andererseits aber auch aus bestehender wissenschaftlicher Literatur zu verwandten Themenfeldern. Zusätzlich wurden noch in einer Tagebuchstudie, die im Vorhinein in Kooperation mit der Fazit Digital durchgeführt wurde, die Einflussfaktoren Vorerfahrung und Risikowahrnehmung in Bezug auf den Datenschutz identifiziert. Als letztes wurde noch die Technikaffinität als Moderatorvariable eingesetzt, und ja, so sieht dann das fertige Modell aus. Ja, kurz zur Methode. Die Datenerhebung erfolgt mittels eines standardisierten Online-Fragebogens über einen Panel-Anbieter, der von der FAZ Digital gesponsert wurde, wurden 439 Personen befragt. Der Fragebogen teilte sich in die einzelnen Konstrukte auf, wobei die Nutzungsabsicht über 39 potenzielle Anwendungsfälle erfragt wurde, die zuvor in der Tagebuchstudie identifiziert wurden, und die Datenauswertung fand mittels hierarchischer Regression statt. Ja, hier sieht man die verkürzte Version der Ergebnisse der Regression. Die einzelnen Faktoren wurden schrittweise aufgenommen, sodass man sehen konnte, wie viel sich der Erklärungsbeitrag verbessert, wenn man diesen Faktor mit aufnimmt. Ich werde jetzt gleich auf der nächsten Folie auf die einzelnen Faktoren eingehen. Auf dieser Folie werden jetzt nur noch die Faktoren gezeigt, die einen signifikanten Einfluss auf die Nutzungsabsicht haben. Da ist zum einen der erwartete Nutzen, der den höchsten Einfluss aufzeigt. Das ist auch konform mit bisherigen Studien. Und das bedeutet einfach für die Praxis, dass es sehr gut ist, wenn man den Kunden ja die Vorteile zum Vorgängermodell aufzeigt und welchen Nutzen man hat, den man davor nicht hatte. Dann ein weiterer Einflussfaktor ist die Vorerfahrung, sprich, wenn ich schon mal irgendwie in Berührung gekommen bin mit der Technologie, habe ich weniger Berührungsängste und kann vielleicht auch den Nutzen und den Aufwand besser beurteilen. Deswegen ist es ganz gut, wenn man seine Kunden die Technik ausprobieren lässt. Als nächsten Punkt gibt es noch das Risikobewusstsein. Das ist so zu interpretieren, dass wenn ich das Gefühl habe, dass ich über das Risiko Bescheid weiß, dann habe ich auch das Gefühl, dass ich es besser unter Kontrolle habe. Deswegen ist eine transparente Informationsgestaltung sehr wichtig. Die letzten beiden Punkte sind die Offenheit und die Gewissenhaftigkeit, die einen Einfluss haben. Und ich glaube, das ist relativ selbstsprechend. Also für offene Personen gerne eine spannende Informationsdarstellung, ja, aufzeigen, dass sie einem neuen Trend folgen, und für gewissenhafte Personen eher eine sachliche Darstellung und ja, das Gefühl geben, dass es praktisch und sinnvoll ist. Ja, zum Schluss noch ein kleines Fazit. Also insgesamt hat ja der Einbezug nutzerspezifischer Variablen keinen großen Erklärungsbeitrag geleistet, lediglich 5%. Inhaltlich war es jedoch sehr aufschlussreich, vor allem für die Praxis. Zusätzlich muss man sagen, dass die Studie einigen Limitationen unterliegt, vor allem im Bereich der Operationalisierung der Konstrukte, und generell lassen die Ergebnisse auch darauf hindeuten, dass die Struktur komplexer gewesen wäre, als es in der hierarchischen Regression abgedeckt wird. Und deswegen wäre ein Forschungsausblick, das Modell nochmal zu modifizieren und eben ein Strukturgleichungsmodell zu verwenden und auch die Messung der tatsächlichen Nutzung anhand von objektiven Nutzungsdaten wäre natürlich aufschlussreich. Vielen Dank für Ihre Aufmerksamkeit und ich freue mich auf eine spannende Diskussionsrunde.
Ja, vielen Dank für den interessanten Vortrag. Meine erste Frage wäre, wenn man sich die breitere Literatur zur Technologieakzeptanz anschaut, gibt es denn Szenarien, in denen jetzt die Persönlichkeit der Befragten wirklich eine entscheidende Rolle spielt, auch zum Beispiel im Vergleich zu dem Nutzen, der ja in Ihrem Modell die dominante Rolle spielt?
Ja, also tatsächlich, wenn man sich die Literatur anguckt, lässt sich feststellen, dass der erwartete Nutzen meist der ausschlaggebende Faktor ist. Es wurde jedoch auch oder die Wichtigkeit der Persönlichkeit festgestellt. Zum Beispiel gab es eine Studie in Bezug auf die Internetnutzung. Und da kam zum Beispiel raus, dass gewissenhafte Personen die Internetnutzung dann akzeptieren, wenn es für die Arbeit im Arbeitskontext ist, aber nicht für den Unterhaltungskontext. Oder dass natürlich extrovertierte, offene Personen schneller dazu neigen, etwas auszuprobieren, weil sie einem Trend folgen wollen und nicht außen vor sein wollen. Deswegen gab es in einigen Kontexten durchaus einen Einfluss, aber der war nie größer als der des erwarteten Nutzens.
Mhm. Smart TVs sind ja mehr oder weniger die beliebtesten Smart Home Devices, wenn ich die Daten richtig im Kopf habe. Inwieweit ist denn das wichtig für Ihre Studie?
Also der Untersuchungsgegenstand wurde tatsächlich so ausgewählt, dass eine breite Masse einen Berührungspunkt damit hatte, aber auch, weil es in einer Kooperation mit der Firma Fazit Digital stattgefunden hat, die genau dafür einen Panel-Anbieter hatten, mit Personen, die schon seit mehreren Jahren Smart TVs benutzen. Aber allerdings war es für unsere Studie ein guter Untersuchungsgegenstand, weil wir eben die breite Masse eben ansprechen wollten. Und ja, das ist jetzt nicht sowas wie Alexa, was zum Beispiel vielleicht meine Oma noch nicht gehört hat, aber ihr Smart TV hat sie tatsächlich auch und hat es auch schon mal gesehen. So, deswegen wurde der Untersuchungsgegenstand gewählt. Kann aber anders ausfallen bei anderen Technologien, die komplexer sind. Das war auch so ein bisschen im Forschungsausblick die Kritik, dass komplexere Technologien eventuell andere Einflussfaktoren haben oder sich andere oder stärker ausspielen, sowas wie die Technikaffinität.
Wir haben auch eine Frage von YouTube. Wenn man statt ins Privatleben in Berufskontexte geht, ist der Einfluss der Persönlichkeit eher noch kleiner?
Kann sein, könnte aber auch wieder genauso sein, wie ich vorher angesprochen habe, mit der Gewissenhaftigkeit. Also kann ja gut sein, wenn ich jetzt im Arbeitskontext bin, eigentlich privat für mich überhaupt nicht in Frage kommt, aber der Arbeitgeber das erwartet. Könnte gut sein, dass es schon einen großen Einfluss hat, aber kann ich jetzt nicht bestätigen.
Luigi, hast du eine Frage?
Vielleicht eine kleine noch hinten dran. Sie haben das zu dem Risikobewusstsein ausgewertet. Mich würde interessieren, warum Sie nicht die Risikobereitschaft da berücksichtigt? Oder ist das aus Ihrer Sicht gleichbedeutend oder das eine weniger wichtig als das andere?
Also der Einflussfaktor kam tatsächlich aus einer Tagebuchstudie, die wir davor gemacht haben. Und da wurde häufig eben gesagt, ich bin mir eines Risikos bewusst, würde es aber trotzdem machen. Und tatsächlich saßen wir lange auch da, ob wir Risikobereitschaft oder Bewusstsein nehmen, sind dann aber an dem Bewusstsein hängen geblieben. Und es könnte gut sein, also diese ganzen Risikofaktoren, als wir die gebildet haben, hat sich auch gezeigt, je nachdem, welche Items man da reinnimmt, dass da unterschiedliche Ergebnisse rauskommen. Und wäre auf jeden Fall spannend, in einer weiteren Studie noch mehr zu differenzieren.
Ihre Future Work bezieht sich ja hauptsächlich auf die Methodik, aber gibt es auch Ideen, sozusagen den Kontext auszubreiten, oder ist man eben durch das Panel in dieser Art und Weise jetzt erstmal gebunden?
An sich ist man nicht gebunden. Es wäre auf jeden Fall spannend, auch auf andere Untersuchungsgegenstände auszuweiten, aber vor allem vor dem Hintergrund, dass man die Methodik erweitert, weil wir da eben schon an die Grenzen gestoßen sind. Und damit man dann aussagekräftige Studien hat, würde ich sagen, müsste beides beachtet werden, aber wäre natürlich für alle Smart Home Devices spannend zu testen.
Es gibt noch viel Arbeit. Leider sind wir auch schon wieder am Ende von unserer kurzen Q&A-Session. Also vielen herzlichen Dank nochmal für Ihren Vortrag.
Dankeschön.
Und the next presenter is Luisa Küchler, and you can direct your questions to her in German or English.
Online fundraising is becoming increasingly important for non-profit organizations, but the factors that convince people to make a donation online have not yet been fully investigated. In this present work, the lack of know-how is targeted when investigating how factors of the design of organizational websites in a context of e-health may affect online fundraising. Along with the extension of the technology acceptance model by van der Heijden, the three constructs of content, usability, and aesthetics are investigated in their way of influencing the intention to donate. Regarding the increased relevance of trustworthiness of health-related information on the web, the variable of trust in the organization is included in the model. Additionally, research questions about demographic aspects such as age and gender are posed. Data of 2 studies was used to examine factors of online donation. The first study was designed in a between-subject design, so that every subject saw 1 out of 30 health-related websites, and after rating it, made a decision about a possible donation of their own money to the organization. The second study used within-subject design to show every subject 3 websites. The subjects rated each website and in the end decided to which of these they would A. donate money provided by the researchers, and B. donate their own money they had earned from doing the survey. For statistical analysis, logistic regressions were performed. The results showed different relevance of predictors in different scenarios of donation. For the donation of one's own money, the perceived content and trust in the organization showed the greatest influence. Usability, on the other hand, showed a small negative connection, but this was not a significant effect. The perceived aesthetics of the website was not significantly related to the dependent variable either. The second model of logistic regression, which used the decision about donating money provided by others, so decision A from study 2, showed that the majority of predictors had no significant relationship to the dependent variable. When donating other people's money, the aesthetics of the website were the most important factor. Thus, the design of the website, but also trust in the organization, are highly relevant. The differences between the two scenarios of online donation might be explained by the increased relevance of the decision, which results from donating one's own money, and according cognitive processes. Nevertheless, further research should examine influences of additional variables and establish implications for successful digital donation generation in the healthcare sector.
So this is very fascinating. I'm wondering whether you expect that these results would hold if you, for example, scale them to a larger group context or just replicate the study itself. I mean, I find it very intriguing that you see this difference between this, let's call it shallow decision-making when you donate others' money or when you're donating your own money.
So this was not a result that we expected, but I think it makes sense that there's a difference between the donation decision when it comes to donating others' money, which is not really a scenario that is realistic in our everyday life. But yeah, we thought that this might be explained by these the relevance of the decision and maybe cognitive processes that occur when you want to donate your own money.
Yeah, if I may skip in, you see this often in online research when you do website evaluations. If you have an easy decision, aesthetics is often very important. But if you force people to reflect, so would you recommend it to a friend? Are you sure the information is good and so on? Then the influence of aesthetics goes down and content becomes more and more important. So you see this often in website evaluations, but for donation decisions, we were surprised.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting because you would expect that there is some notion of altruism or other regarding preferences playing in the scenario. So I'm wondering, did you control for how much people care about the particular issue at hand and whether that had an impact on the factors that played a role?
So this was not something we controlled forward. Yeah, maybe you could look for that in further research.
Luigi, do you have a question?
Yeah, only regarding the further research. You gave some examples on further research, but I would really like to understand how further research should look like in order to get more insights and maybe also to evaluate the results you got from this study.
So it would be nice to see how this works in like websites that really want or have the intent to generate donations, and maybe you could there look for numbers and the numbers of donations that were made in this scenario, and maybe rate these websites, because this were have related websites that were from another study.
So we have an online question. Would you expect this dominance of aesthetics to also hold true if you look at corporate donations, where it is also not really your money that you're donating?
I think it depends on the importance of the decision maybe as well, and not only if it's the money from another person or yourself, but you have to keep in mind that it's in the high relevance of the decision when it comes to your own money. And maybe in these corporate decisions, the relevance is there as well.
So in classical bargaining games, you often see that, for example, the amount that is at stake may play an influencing role. So how do you evaluate this factor in the context of your study?
I think that's difficult to compare. Yeah.
If I skip in, I think we didn't manipulate it because we just took a first look into website design and donation decisions. But I am aware of those studies in negotiation research, and I'm pretty sure that the amount of money correlates very highly with the importance of the decision and your reflective processes on your decisions. So I'm pretty sure if the amount goes up, the impact of aesthetics should be going down, and the impact of reflective processes and thus content processes will go up. That's my guess, but would be a nice study.
I agree. I think it would be very interesting. And unfortunately, our time is already over again. So I want to thank the two speakers in this session. Our next speaker is Lea Müller, and you can direct questions to her in German or English.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lea Müller, and together with my colleagues from the University of Münster, we conducted a study which showed trust in decision support systems to be associated with multiple positive work outcomes under certain conditions. The work and business world is getting more and more complex, and organizations generate huge amounts of data. This leads decision makers to face a growing complexity during their decisions, which can have negative effects on work and personal outcomes like the decision quality and well-being. One option of organizations to face this challenge is the implementation of a decision support system. Prior research could already show that the availability of a decision support system during decisions had positive effects on users' performance and on their well-being. Additionally, the availability of a decision support system triggered the forgetting of obsolete data and led to a release of cognitive capacities, which is also called the directed forgetting effect. However, the mere existence of a decision support system might not be enough to trigger these positive effects, as the usage is always associated with uncertainties and risks. This is where trust comes into play. Trust is defined as the willingness to depend on and be vulnerable to a decision support system under uncertainty and risks. Prior studies could already find trust to be a significant mediator for the relationship between decision support system usage and positive work and personal outcomes. The current study had two aims. First, to again examine the association between trust and a decision support system and the work outcomes, performance, well-being, and directed forgetting. Second, we wanted to extend prior research by examining whether typical context conditions that exist in business organizations moderate the association of trust and work outcomes. These context conditions were users' accountability, user distraction, and market dynamics. To achieve these aims, we conducted a study with 201 participants. The study took part at the laboratory, where participants were asked to complete decision tasks. More precisely, participants were asked to take on the role of an employee of a fictitious sports manufacturing company and decide about the distribution of different types of bicycles across different countries. While this task, participants received the support of a decision support system, which provided recommended distributions, as can be seen on this picture. During the decision task, context variables were manipulated. For example, for distraction, those participants in the high distraction condition were distracted multiple times during the decision task, while those in the low distraction condition were not. The results of the study showed that trust in a decision support system was positively associated with users' performance during the decision tasks and their well-being. However, we could not confirm trust in the decision support system to be associated with the release of cognitive capacities. While we could not find accountability and market dynamics to be significant contextual moderators, we found the following for distraction. On the one hand, distraction directly affected participants' strain experience, so that highly distracted participants perceived significantly higher strain. For the moderating effect, we found that distraction weakened the association between trust and strain. Thus, the more distracted participants were during their decisions, the smaller the association between trust and strain. Taken together, the results of the study confirm the essential role of trust on the effect decision support systems have on core work outcomes, specifically performance and well-being. Additionally, the results show distraction to be a significant contextual moderator for the association between trust and strain. Thus, software designers and organizations should be especially cautious in designing and implementing systems that can be trusted by their users. Moreover, organizations should put effort in providing sufficient protection and strategies against unplanned interruptions and distractions. Organizations might take advantage of our insights by making the development of employees' trust a core goal during the implementation of new information systems.
So this is a very interesting talk. I'm wondering to which degree it ties in on the ongoing debate on to which degree artificial intelligence technologies are replacing work or enhancing work. So my first question in this line of questions would be, where's the challenge in the tasks that you studied? Do you think it is more of an intellectual challenge, or is it more that with repeated execution of the task, you're worried that the worker is actually doing some mistakes?
So actually, I would say it's both. So on the one hand, it's for organizations that their employees do good and generate good work and have a good performance. But on the other hand, it's also on the side of the worker that they don't feel like being replaced by a certain technology, but using a technology that actually helps them during their work. So I would say it's both.
Yeah, I mean, I would be wondering, right, whether the decision support system in the scenario would just not do a better job by itself, right? Or just essentially seek confirmation maybe from a supervising user versus a scenario where we really have a worker who needs to take context into account or do some critical reasoning that may be non-obvious even for an advanced kind of AI technology.
Tone?
You couldn't hear what I was saying?
No, mine.
No, I can hear you.
Okay. It's a question we discussed often in the project because it's ongoing since 4 years, and we often talk about AI and its influence. And the thing is that the system we have built relies on the data that are there. And the human factor is, well, to see what's happened. See this year in the corona pandemics and the problems that all rise from this pandemic situation. No system we could have built have foreseen this. So it's very important to have this human factor in it. But of course, for simple decision tasks, the system is better, of course, as long as everything goes as it was in the past. And normally that's not the case in the market.
So my last question regarding that is then, how would you expect the results to differ if the task is much more complex and intellectual stimulating and really demanding for the individual to draw upon their expertise?
I think that's when trust is even more important. So if you think you are a real expert in that topic and you need to be aware of the whole context and stuff, but you also get the support of a system, then it's even more important to trust the system to also be an expert in in that topic. And I would think that the more complex, the more trust is important.
Luigi, do you have a question?
And my question was going exactly into this direction.
I'm sorry.
I was asking whether you studied your decision support in a work environment, in the sense of management of a company, but do you think your results are also applicable in the health domain or in the disaster management domain, where you also have decision support systems everywhere? You already answered it.
Yeah, but maybe I can say something about that. Actually, that's what we're doing right now. So it's the plan to look at the usage of such systems in the real world, because then it's even more associated with risks to use the system than when you're in a laboratory doing a study. And actually, in this phase of the project, where we want to look at software usage and decision support system usage in the field and in real companies.
You're right, for future research, disaster management would be really, really interesting because of the high dynamics of the situation. And again, of course, because of the need of a system helping people at the place of a disaster. But well, it must be a very good and very fast system. So it would be a very interesting approach for FCI research in many different facets.
Yeah, thanks.
So perhaps one last question. Do you expect that decision support systems make actually the user better, or are they more or less over time outsourcing the skills, the memory, etc., to these advanced agents?
Actually, that's what the Directed Forgetting is about. It was only a small part of today's talk, but actually we think that when users get the support of a system in one aspect of their work, where they can rely on the system, they release cognitive capacities for other parts of their work and can put more effort in these parts of their work than the part where they receive support from the system.
So this is a somewhat hopeful conclusion, right?
Right.
All right. So unfortunately, we are again out of time. Thank you very much for your presentation. And our last speaker is Gordon George Brown, and you may direct questions to him in English or German.
Greetings and welcome to this short demonstration of our research titled The Effects of Consultant Avatar Size and Dynamics on Customer Trust in Online Consultations, conducted by the Chair for Human-Centered Information Systems of the Clausthal University of Technology. My name is Gordon Brown, and I will provide some insight into our research for this video. As part of a joint research project aiming to build a digitalized sales platform, we looked into remote augmented reality consultations, which would allow customers to receive remote consultations on a planned purchase by a real consultant. Before actually buying, any recommended products could be viewed in the designated spots in augmented reality, while the consultant could also be interacted with as an avatar. For this scenario, we were interested in the impact of the consultant avatar's appearance and behavior on the perceived social presence, trust, and consultation satisfaction of customers. We based our study on past research which delved into the influence of the appearance of an avatar used by a remotely located expert on the perceived trust and social presence of a local worker. They found that using miniature avatars in these settings results in significantly higher perceived social presence in study participants. Perceived trust was not affected. As such, we chose avatar size as one variable to examine for our consultation scenario. On the same basis, we chose to compare life-sized avatars with miniature ones as well. For a second variable, we examined avatar behavior aspects that have received little attention in past research and settled on avatar dynamics. We decided to compare avatars that could be remotely controlled by the consultant, mirroring their camera movements, and avatars that remain static and automatically look in the customer's direction. We combined the variable values in a 2x2 experiment as shown here. Here, we can see the first of our 4 variable combinations, a life-size avatar that dynamically looks and walks around when the consultant moves their camera viewpoint on their end. For the second of our variable combinations, a life-size static avatar that remains in place and always looks at the customer was used. Next, we're taking a look at the first miniaturized avatar, again combined with dynamic behavior. The avatar floats and is kept at head height to allow the customer to look in the same direction as with life-size avatars when seeking eye contact. Finally, we combined a miniature avatar with the same static behavior as with the life-size avatar shown before. Here, we can see the envisioned scenario with the consultant's avatar, a virtual piece of furniture, and a customer. We conducted the experiment as a mock remote consultation with 12 participants in total. The participants' goal was to find a suitable couch for their new living room. For data gathering during the actual experiment, we used questionnaires for measuring trust, social presence, and consultation satisfaction. We also conducted interviews to find anything the participants liked or disliked about the avatars. We used Friedman tests with an alpha of 0.05 to determine if any significant differences exist, and if so, we ran subsequent Wilcoxon-signed rank tests with a Bonferroni-corrected alpha of 0.0083 to find the cause. We found no significant differences in perceived trust. However, the participants reported significantly higher perceived social presence for life-sized avatars when compared to miniature ones. For co-presence, all life-sized avatars were rated significantly higher than any miniature one. We attribute this finding to the small size of the miniature avatars and them not being visible if glancing at the position a life-size avatar's feet would be visible in. The interviews showed a strong preference for life-sized avatars, with 11 participants preferring life-sized versions over their miniature counterparts. 9 of the participants picked all life-size avatars over all miniature ones. All participants unanimously preferred dynamic avatars over their static counterparts. Based on these results, we recommend using dynamic avatars in remote consultations wherever possible. As for size, we recommend going with a life-sized avatar, but further research, which includes always on-screen miniatures, is warranted and has been planned for our future research. Thank you for your attention.
So my first question is obviously, can you move around the life-size avatar also with the pointing of your mouse nicely and let them fly around in the room?
No, the life-size one would just walk around the room realistically. So we looked for the miniature one. I think that's what you're getting at. For the miniature one, we looked for a suitable animation that would, fits the avatar floating, and that's what we settled on because we tried a pedestal which worked. It didn't work as well because it would, drive around the room, and this was the next best thing.
So one question, of course, that comes to mind when you're using these assistants is also the quality of the decisions being made. This was not really the focus of your study, but I'm wondering to which degree this first impression of using this life-size and dynamic avatar may have been actually a distraction from the task at hand. And rather, as I said, you have an effect of distraction or attention directed towards the avatar rather than attention directed towards the task.
Yeah, we thought about if that could have impacted our results in any way, which is also why we randomized how our participants, first saw the avatars. Some participants started with the miniature ones, some participants started with the life-sized ones. So that's how we tried to counteract that. Also to counteract order effects in general, and but still, yeah. Because there's an avatar in there, and that's quite an unusual, situation. It could have distracted our participants, but we did not take into account or did not counteract that in any other way than randomizing our starting order.
Mm-hmm. Luigi, do you have a question?
Do you think that the appearance of your avatar had some influence on trust and
it could have, but we actually conducted a little study prior to this one to determine the general appearance of an avatar that would garner the most acceptance for a consultation scenario beforehand. So we presented around 25 people with different avatars originating from different ethnicities, different ages, stuff like that. And we specifically picked the avatar that fared the best in that little prior study. And yeah, also we tried to align with past research on the uncanny valley effect and stuff like that, and try to avoid anything that would, you know, elicit a feeling of uncanniness in people. So that's also why we chose a male avatar, because our consultants were male, which were talking to the people, and in past research it has been shown that the avatar should at least fit visually what is audible to the participants to improve the experience.
So classical studies on agent systems or recommender systems with agents often compare the agent then to a human agent. Obviously, the same question arises here. Do you have any plans for future work on contrasting the two types of agent also with a human advisor, and what would you expect?
This was a human advisor, so we don't plan on doing that in any way, because sorry, we do have in our research group, we do have a partner which delves into chatbots, who would also be able to control an avatar such as this, which will also be studied, obviously. But our group specifically will focus on interaction with actual humans that use an avatar online.
So there have been a lot of scandals where individuals expected to interact with a human agent, for example, on online dating websites. How do you expect humans to actually be able to infer that they, at all stages of the conversation, interact with a human being rather than artificial agent?
First off, we have implemented voice transmission, so that's one very obvious cue, I think, that you're actually talking with a real human. Also, the lip movement of the avatar is synchronized to the actual human behind the consultation. Other than that, we haven't thought about this really in any way, because you can hear a voice. You could maybe start with a video chat, a regular video chat, and change to the avatar just to counteract some worry of the users. But yeah, I think the voice of an actual human is a very strong indicator that you're talking to an actual human, and deep fakes are not as prevalent yet as to be worried in that regard.
So maybe as a last question, you studied essentially how people perceive the avatar, but also did they behave differently in their own mimic and facial expressions and gestures when interacting with the avatar, depending on its size?
Yes. First off, yes. We didn't put this in our paper, but the people definitely reacted, at least initially, differently to especially the miniature. People were like, "Oh, there's a little guy floating over there," and I also observed some people before the actual consultation started walking closer to the miniature avatars and taking a closer look at them, stuff like that. But during the actual consultation, the people did not interact with the avatar differently in any way, except for, of course, what we found during our study, that they did not perceive the miniatures as much as they did the life-sized ones, and as such rated it with less co-presence.
Very interesting. Luigi, do you have a final question? Otherwise, unfortunately, we are also out of time for this talk. So thank you very much, Gordon, for this very interesting talk on avatars, which also brings me to the end of the session on security, privacy, and trust. I just want to thank everybody who presented their research today and also who listened in today in our online presentation. If you have any questions regarding the talks, I know the presentations and Q&A sessions were very short. please don't be shy and write the authors to their email addresses in the papers, or also participate in the Discord, where you can also post questions. So once again, thank you very much, and I wish you a pleasant day.